I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? All right, y'all. So now talking about the new president-elect having a long, extensive criminal history, talking about one of the moguls of the music industry, having a criminal history that's been identified and being currently incarcerated, and that's Sean Puffy Combs. If y'all didn't listen to our last episode, you should go listen to it. We talk about conspiracy theories. But yeah, like, what does this mean for our criminal legal system? I hear that after Donald Trump was named to be the president-elect, the stock rates for privatized prisons went up a significant amount. And having place in Florida, knowing that Geo Group is right there in West Palm, and Geo Group is not about geology or our ecology. It's actually about a private prison system that runs all of private prisons. They also run reentry homes. They run halfway houses. So anything where the state is locking you up in some way, shape, or form under the criminal legal system, Geo Group has hands in it. And so there was a ton of money that has gone into the privatized system. But then we also saw on the stock exchange the stocks going up for privatized prisons. And we know that cop cities have been popping up and are being formulated. And we know that the legislation is changing, and what is considered legal in our freedom of autonomy under our Constitution, a lot of those liberties are going to be rolled back to make America great again. And so, yeah, the criminal legal system is about to be impacted again in the way that we've seen it weaponized and used for the benefit of helping to sustain white supremacy. So, yeah.
Yeah, you just said a mouthful. And I want to say that I've just been learning about this in the past like 5 to 8 years, more about, I call it a carceral system now. I used to call it a justice system or a criminal justice system. I don't use that terminology anymore because there's no justice about it, and there never has been. And it's so interesting to me as I was learning about the for-profit prisons and I'd never heard of this Geo Group that you're speaking of, but it doesn't surprise me that they would have a hand in and be making profits off of anything that has to do with either house arrest. I'm assuming all of that monitoring systems are probably run by them, and all of that. I know, how expensive that is, and how the burden of that expense is often on the families of the people who are supposed to be wearing these monitors. And so many state and local police stations don't even have the equipment to monitor the monitors. So the families are paying for it. It's on the person's ankle, but they're often not even monitored the way they need to be, or are supposed to be, because the municipality doesn't have the money to run the whole. The whole thing is just so, it's all of it is bogus. And now we see that through a lens of not only the carceral system and how it's utilized in terms of convict leasing,
Mhm.
the renting or the using of incarcerated folks for cheap labor, which we
Slavery. Convict leasing is the new form of slavery.
yes,
So
it is.
basically, if you are somebody who is an incarcerated community member and your prison makes a contract with one of the major corporations or businesses, and Amazon is one of them, then the labor of the folks in prison is used for whatever distribution, packing boxes, and all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you're not having to pay minimum wage, you're paying cents on a dollar for whatever,
Right.
an incarcerated person can make doing a job while incarcerated.
And then a few years ago, I'm sure you heard about this, being, living significantly long time in California, the using, currently incarcerated folks to put out wildfires, massive wildfires,
Hmm.
with barely any training, and the dangling of the carrot to say we're going to lessen your sentence if you go fight this wildfire that even trained firefighters are succumbing to because it's such a big deal. And so just, yeah, there's so many levels to it, and I don't know that you and I have ever really had a conversation full on about it. The cop cities are popping up all around our country, and
Sure.
the awareness that they are really basically like establishing military bases all around the country, that
100%.
people
Hmm.
think about how we have military bases all around the world in places that we feel as the US, as this imperialistic state, believe that if we have centers in those places in the country, that geopolitically it serves our purposes. Well, take that understanding and translate it to cop cities, and you'll understand why so many people are so against and are protesting these cop cities, because it's not just for training of police officers, certainly not training of peace officers. It's establishing essentially military bases on a state and municipality level all across our country. And what are they
Yeah.
going to be used for
Well,
when
it's a militarized state. We know that they're going into a militarized state as they're rolling back the laws. They have to be able to enforce them in the ways that they want it to be enforced, and they want people to behave. And so that's why you are going to be seeing that. And then just I'm going to challenge any of our listeners, and to share this with their networks, is to see how much of your tax dollars, how many cents on the dollar are spent towards the carceral system. Back in the day, a couple of years ago, it was 40 cents on the dollar here, well, in Florida,
okay.
that was going towards the criminal legal system in some way, shape, or form. So when we're talking about like what our state budgets and everything look like in Florida, there was a significant amount that was going to what was being labeled security measures. And those security measures, both in the schools and in our just our civilian communities, were to establish cameras, increase the level of law enforcement officers, to increase the level of surveilling technology beyond cameras. Like they have these other
Yeah,
things that fly around and stuff like that.
right.
Um, the metal detectors in the schools, for the young people, all of those things are dollars that are fed into the criminal legal system. And they're really built on this context of a narrative of creating fear. And we saw a lot of that narrative being built up on migrant people populations that exist in the US, that have always existed in the US.
Right.
And we see that with the overcriminalization of poverty. And we know that the income inequality gap is growing and growing and growing. So there's going to be more people that are impoverished and targeted and criminalized for poverty, because people are going to want their streets to feel clean and safe. And when people don't have money, I guess people get scared that they're less safe, which is not a logical thought process, but it is a storytelling that
Right.
we are given with our narratives about desperation. But desperation does breed forms of chaos, as we see in cities that have become more desperate because of the larger amount of people that are using substances to deal with their mental health or whatever their
Right.
emotional state is. And so, yeah, it's the more that you start connecting the dots of the way that our systems and our legislation and who our representation is, the more the picture becomes very much like we saw in these books, where we're going into this one world, new world order of
Mhm.
existence, where you are divided into specific factions and are expected to live with whatever is made accessible to you. And it's not like we don't live like that now. It's just that it's a more blurred
Right.
experience.
The lines are not as specific.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Parable of the Sower, and they
Mm,
had their communities had walls around them with gates and
mhm.
locks and things. And so we don't, there are walled communities around the world, but in this, on US territory, we don't have the walled thing yet, but it could be seen in red lines on maps, right? So all of it is in place. It's just we have the illusion of flexibility and ease of movement over these lines. And it wouldn't take anything at all to remove that flexibility of movement,
Mhm.
for sure. And then you talk about the ban the box concept, and the amount of people that come out of the carceral system, and the roadblocks that are still in place to prevent them from being able to re-enter society and
Mhm.
build a life for themselves, support their family, support themselves, do the things without turning back to a life of crime, because every time they go fill out an application, they have to check the box that says they're a criminal. I mean, when Trump signs whatever he signs, when he takes his oath, and I imagine he signs some sort of piece of paper when he takes his oath, is there going to be a box there? Have you ever been convicted of a felon? I mean, that's where we're at, right? He gets to be elected into the
Gets to check the box and it
he
doesn't
gets
matter. Like he
and
doesn't
it
have
won't stop
any
him. Right, right, right,
repercussions
right.
of any of his criminal history.
Right, it won't
But that's
stop
not
them.
afforded
But
to the, yeah.
but I say all that to just illustrate the ludicrousness of the fact that we now have a convicted felon who's going to be given an oath to sit in the most powerful chair in the world, and yet there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who could not vote in the election because they had a criminal record, but he got elected with a criminal record. So the disconnect of that is, not lost on any of us, but I think it is lost on a large part of our. I mean, it's inconceivable to me that that's not a deal breaker for people, and I know why it's
That
not.
what's not a deal breaker.
The fact that he was a convicted felon, that they would still vote for a convicted felon. I mean, the drug of white supremacy is so powerful that they're going to vote a convicted felon in, and probably a large because they tell themselves that he's not really guilty, that it was all a scam, and that it was the charges were trumped up, no pun intended. So
Trumped up.
see how I did that? So yeah, it's just so multifaceted, and
Mhm.
I used to work for an organization that had a particular section of our mandate for how we wanted to see the world, that talked about humanizing the justice system, and
Mhm.
and I used to really push against that because, first of all, it's not a justice system. Second of all, there's no way to humanize it. It will never be taken down, just like the military industrial complex, because there's too much money to be made in it.
Absolutely.
The lawyers and the judges and the clerks and the courtrooms, not to mention the prisons and the ankle monitoring and the probation, folks, and all of the fees that are generated. And I can't even conceive of how much money is generated through our
Mhm.
carceral system. So no, it's
Well,
not.
I mean, I think that the number is for every incarcerated person, it was like $63,000
I haven't seen
um
that
a,
before,
a
so
year. Like that's something to like look up. When I used to go and mentor, young people, especially. So in Florida, there is this underlying knowledge that once you take the third grade test, if you don't pass the grade test, a prison cell is essentially earmarked for you,
hmm.
because they're saying that your trajectory is going to lead you right to the prison cell. So that's how they are calculating the numbers. And I used to tell the young people that, especially because I was in, mixed Black and Brown communities and schools, but like there is an actual like price for your existence that somebody makes, and they've already earmarked an amount of money that
Yeah.
when you go into a cell they're going to make. So they are going to definitely be making sure
Yeah.
that there are laws that exist so that they can make that bottom line, because it is business. And and to your point about the carceral system, not only the obstacles and barriers once you get out of being incarcerated, but
Right.
the impact that you sustain being incarcerated.
Mhm.
It's an inhumane way of addressing harm, violence, and conflict. So there's no way that it ever could be humanized because it wasn't thought of and it wasn't created with human consideration.
Right.
Because if we were a humanistic society that valued other humans as humans and their lives,
Mhm.
then we wouldn't make the choice to lock them up and have them in really horrible existence and conditions and believe that that was going to get them to a place where they are going to be able to re-enter our society and
Right.
be able to participate with us in a harmonious way, because the trauma that you go through with that experiences with during COVID, not getting the care that you need, during all of the climate changes when things are happening and folks that are imprisoned are kept in the prisons, but there's flooding all around, or,
Right.
hurricanes passing through, or tornadoes swishing by,
It
and
happened in
and
Florida.
those folks
Yeah,
not,
the prison was left to
they're
just
they're just
fend for
left
itself.
there.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
don't, and we as outside of the carceral system don't even think about that unless there is one of our family members who are experiencing that type of trauma. But yes, that the criminal legal system, the way that it exists and the way that the laws are going to need to be created to feed into that. So like they're talking about women who decide that they still want to have some body autonomy and make decisions about their body and then cross state borders to get their needs met on a health care basis, then have the possibility of being criminalized when they go back to their home states. And that's another type of jail
Right.
imprisonment system that is going to be erected. So like again, with this election, with the way that votes are coming through, the thought of what the impacts are going to be on a multi-tiered level are very, very real, and the impacts on larger than Black and Brown communities. Now we're going to be again, we already see women criminalized, from being exposed to or pushed into the sex trade because of the inequalities in our gender expression relationships. But this is going to be now increased and amplified more, or has the potential to be increased and amplified more with these other additional institutions being established.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so multi-leveled, and for, I know that you know this, but for those who are listening who may not know the origin of policing, it was bred out of, it was after the Emancipation Proclamation and after the enslaved had been freed. The police departments, police patrols were created out of an element of society called slave catchers. And these were humans that were charged with going and finding runaway folks who were enslaved. And so now the enslaved were no longer enslaved, supposedly, based on paper and legal. So now they had to create a way to keep those formerly enslaved in line. And the way to do that was to create the police department. So it is inherently, I mean, the entire system is inherently fraught with white supremacy and racism and all of the bedrock foundational ideals of this of our U.S. society on U.S. soil. And so it's a large reason why people talked about defunding the police, and it, and why you can't reform it. I don't believe personally that you can reform it, because it's born out of control and oppression, and its foundational core is to oppress others. And so I don't believe it
For
can.
economy, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's again,
Or,
it's capitalism and it's imperialism.
right.
So it's not only oppressing others because the oppression of others allows that type of system to
Right.
sustain,
Right.
but it is for capital gain, right? So like when slavery doesn't exist in the form that we hear about it historically, then it has to exist in other ways because the actual foundation of the economy of this nation exist having a large worker population of human beings that
It can be
don't
controlled.
are not paid the
Right.
value of their contribution. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that in particular. We're not just talking about oppressing people and locking them up. We're not talking about safety, because safety has not actually been increased with increased militarization of our states at all in any way, shape, or form. There's no data that supports that. So all we're doing is just making sure that we maintain a slave economy of scale
Yeah.
for production in the United States, and this continuous wealth gap and inequity gap that exists, and that is not going to be able to be sustainable.
So how sadistic is it that that entire system that you just described, that we are built on, that supports our economy, supports our capitalistic indulgences in this society, how sadistic is it that we are seeing the president of the United States and so many members of his cabinet who have either been convicted of something or are being investigated for, some sort of charges or have charges already against them, are now going to be in control of the entire government? I mean, to me, it's just another personification of the intense illness of this country, and the ways in which we talked before about cycles, the ways in which those cycles keep propagating. I'm curious if you have what your gut thoughts on that are. Is it just another perpetuation of the cycle, or is there something deeper than that?
Yeah, but the thing that I'm thinking about is what it is that we make a decision to criminalize, what and where and when,
Right.
right? And the pendulum of that swings to benefit capitalism and imperialism. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking about, because there we see in the history of the United States where a demographic of people were criminalized for using drugs. And
Hmm.
then when that demographic switches, the criminalization switches and the legalities around it switch. And what we did see with this election, what we saw again is the way that we exist, particularly in the United States, is to support and comfort white positionality,
Hmm.
right? Because we do have so many, we're seeing it blatantly. This is not just, this is an observation that we can see,
Right.
where people who legally have committed crimes
Hmm.
are not being held to the accountability of their crimes and or behavior. And not only are they not being held to the accountability of the crime and the behavior, but they're also amplified to be representative of the communities which they come from. So then it begs the question, are you representative of your community of humans who are then also criminals? Right now, I'm making associations that
Yeah.
are not rooted in anything, but at the same time, it forces you to recognize the inequalities of our institutions and laws, because they can be altered at any time to meet the needs of those that are in power.
Right.
And those are the things that I'm hoping that we're building power in community to stand up against and to challenge, in a way that we are holding our representatives now accountable to what is going to benefit the larger mass of
Right.
society.
Right. Yeah. It's a sick and twisted process that we've seen happen in this country since its inception, that it keeps morphing. I don't know, did you hear the statistic of this past election that there were quite a few motions on different ballots on different states where people were actually voting whether or not slavery should be legal? And slavery being a broader term, I'm sure was called something else on the ballot, but people were actually voting yes to keeping slavery in place. And so
Yeah.
I don't know, I need to do a deeper dive on that to like see what states, and I don't know if you know the answer to that, but
I
um,
have an idea. So there's the Abolish Slavery National Network that has been existing. They have three states that have ratified their state constitutions to remove the slavery clause from it. On the ballot during this presidential election, you had both Nevada and California. Nevada passed, and Prop 6 in California, the slavery did not pass. Uh, So in a very progressive state,
Yeah.
the most progressive state of our union in
Yeah.
California, the to remove the slavery clause did not pass. So it really, again, I don't know if I don't know how to look at those results and make an analysis that people understand what they were actually voting to end, because
Mm.
I cannot believe
I
that people
know.
would want to maintain slavery from all of the history of our understanding of what slavery looks like. And I know that with legislation, there's tricks where they bundle things all together. So like
Yeah.
if you vote, you can't vote for it because then that means you would be voting for these other things. And
Right.
I'm not sure what the actual language of the law is, but we can invite one of my close colleagues on because she was the person um, Jamelia Land is the person who erected Proposition 6 and challenged the state to remove it. The fight continues, and that's the thing that I'm really excited about in this moment. We're talking about all of the harms that we need to be in consideration of and aware of,
Yeah.
and amplifying community so people can be thinking about it as it comes up in your local legislation and state legislation.
Right.
But because there is such an opportunity to share information and such opportunities for us to come together and have conversations as communities, that we can amplify some of these specific issue areas and build power around shifting those. So
Yeah.
there are state legislation, but then there is federal legislations as, those are the things that we need to be finding out who is leading those campaigns and then joining and lending our support to those campaigns as far as being present, being additional bodies that say, yes, we want to see this being moved. But when you have a state like California that does not vote to end slavery or that clause being removed, it really begs to question why. What would be the
Right.
reason that you just don't vote for that to be removed? Again, money, capitalism.
Right. I think you're probably right, though. That they tend to word these things so confusingly often.
Yes, sir.
I don't know what the wording
Hmm.
was in California, but I know my daughter, my young person, lives in South Carolina, and there was an initiative on her ballot that she was confused
Hmm.
about, where it was saying that if you were born in the United States, you automatically got to vote. And she was like, "Well, that's already the case. Why are they asking us to vote yes to this?" And I was thinking about it, and I thought, I bet they're laying the foundation because I know that there's legislation in the works to take away the automatic
Citizenship.
citizenship. If you're born here, you're a citizen here. They want to take that away for all the families that come from other countries, the immigrant families, and they have children here. And they don't want the children to then be the thing that keeps them in the country. They want to be able to deport all of them. So I told her, I said, that's the only thing I could think of because that's already the case. If you're a citizen, you can vote. So she was like, I don't know why they're asking me this. I said, I bet it's because they're laying the foundation because they want to be able to say, and I don't remember what the outcome was, but yeah, those initiatives are often worded in such a way that make it really hard for people to totally understand. But if you're doing your homework ahead of time and you're reading all your reads and you're learning about what's on your ballot before you go into the ballot box, you should be able to understand what they mean. So it's just another plug for people to do their homework before they go to the ballot box. But yeah,
And then not making excuses, right? If
right,
since Prop 6 was not passed,
right.
what is it about wanting to maintain a system of slavery that people are benefiting from or that they believe is an appropriate institution to
Right,
keep in any of our, language?
right, right.
So
And doing that deep
all
dive.
all of those things, again, the criminal legal system is embedded into our national fabric, and there are other methods that have existed in the way that people deal with creating a sense of safety, and safety does not come out of our criminal legal system at all.
Yeah. Especially when the incentives to criminalize, lock up, and throw away the key so many humans from our societies that is only harming our society, not making it better. You know,
Mhm.
I challenge anyone out there, if you're thinking about people that are incarcerated as being inherently bad or inherently wrong, that's part of the problem. We got to,
Hmm.
they're humans first.
Absolutely.
Nobody comes out as a child, as a baby born into this world thinking about all the crimes they're going to commit. That's, it just, that's a narrative that we've all been taught. So thank
And
you.
what are we
Um,
criminalizing, right? If we're
uh,
looking at who the body, like who's making up our prison systems,
yeah,
and what is being criminalized. Again, we're speaking about minor things, y'all. We're speaking about homelessness or being unhoused. We're
right.
speaking, so that's like you're criminalizing poverty or the inability to have a house. We've criminalized a ton of people who were using and or on recreational narcotics medication or
Right.
whatever, using it incorrectly and might have been outside of themselves and had an episode. We're criminalizing mental health, and a majority of us are moving into a state of mental health because we have lived through major traumas. We are criminalizing sex work, right? And so, like, for people, again, like I've said previously, who were forced into the sex trade, or young girls who are forced, into that because they're trying to have food and housing, but then being picked up by the police and sentenced to prison without having their needs met. So we're criminalizing things that need other social services to address,
Right.
that we're only addressing through this additionally traumatic institution and methodology of like kind of locking up and removing people from our communities. And that is only going to continue to breed this cycle of dysfunction in our societies, which is what we've been living under. So it's like when we start to name the realities of the institutions that we exist in and what the outcomes are, and then start to talk about what effective outcomes that don't play into those institutions, we are definitely going to be a more evolved society and community.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard? Why am I
continue to
so
ask yourself,
attached? Why do I give a
Why Do I
fuck?
Give a
Why
Fuck
do
is
I
produced
give
in
a fuck?
collaboration with Johanna and
Why
Deanne.
do I
Music
try so
by
hard?
Norwegian
Why do
musician
I care so
Water.
much?
See you next time.
Why do